He was ordained in that year, and in that year, what the bishops and the king were trying to do was really to harmonize the Presbyterian Church of Scotland with the Anglican Church of England. So, but basically, the king and the bishops were forcing on the church in an assembly, a general assembly that happened in that year, 1618. And it wasn't a free assembly. It wasn't that they were discussing things and then saying, this is more biblical, here's all the biblical reasons why we should, for instance, bring in confirmation, which was seen to be, well, it's obviously one of the Roman Catholic sacraments, and that's the way it was seen in Scotland. So it wasn't like they were saying, here's the biblical arguments for doing that. They just said, the king wants this, you've got to vote for this. We're taking down the names of anyone who doesn't vote for it, and we'll investigate that. So it was manipulation. It was royal intervention in that way. Just a real state control and just brute force that was driving these things through. And as you see, as I said, in 1622, then Dickson is banished because he won't stop preaching about this. After he's ordained, he falls ill and he starts to think seriously about this, and he starts to reflect on it, and he looks at the way in which just the unspiritual way that this is being forced through, and he thinks this is all wrong. This doesn't reflect Scripture. He's convinced of the regulative principle of worship, that it's not, these things aren't indifferent, but that we have to stick to the commands of Scripture in relation to worship. And he's prepared to suffer for that, and as many were at that time. There's an interesting, one of my favorite examples of his outlook at this time, just before he was banished. They were praying together, and this is in 1621, so it's exactly 400 years ago this year. And they were praying together, a lot of ministers, and just really burdened and didn't have liberty in prayer because of all that was going on. And then Dickson, who was a young man at that time, was asked to lead in prayer. And he just had such enlargement of spirit, and he had great faith and assurance that God would deliver them, and that God would once more gloriously appear and deliver his church in the future. And people were so affected by that, they felt assured that it would happen, as if it had already happened. That was the degree of faith and assurance that he had. So it was that was the nature of David Dickson, sort of deeply spiritual, powerful in prayer. And what the Scottish Church did during that time was to really organize themselves in private meetings and in informal networks and ways in which they could really pray about the state of things. And ultimately, 10 years after Dickson's preaching these sermons, things turn around, so that the Scottish, these things that were brought in, different unbiblical practices that were being forced on the church, were actually thrown out, and things were brought about to the revolution that then sparked what would lead to the Westminster Assembly in England.